Manuscripts found at the UK's University of Birmingham could be part of the world's oldest Quran. This is according to new tests. Scholars, they're hailing it as a milestone discovery.
Recently made a very exciting discovery. We've had the manuscript radiocarbon dated, and it's proved to be one of the earliest Quranic manuscripts in the world.
But some say this could rewrite the history of Islam because carbon dating suggests part of the text predates the Prophet Muhammad. We spoke to Professor David Thomas from the University of Birmingham, who examined the manuscripts.
If we want to press the point and say, well, it could be that these fragments come from the middle of the 6th century, because the earliest dating is 658. The earliest dating within the range is 658. Then that would raise huge questions about the traditional origins of Islam.
Claims that the discovery could predate Prophet Muhammad triggered a storm online, with some Twitter users suggesting that it could be propaganda aimed at undermining Islam. Political and social commentator Mohammed Ansar warns that the debates surrounding the alleged oldest Quran are fueling Islamophobia.
What I think has been the most interesting is that we've seen certain groups rallying around this story. So we've seen hardline Muslims saying that this is part of their grievance story, that people in the West and academics are couching Islamophobia behind an academic and a scholarly purdah and are attacking Muslims. But at the same time, we've seen revisionist historians who have been roundly discredited by Europe's top Muslim scholars. And really, it's these people, these revisionist historians, who are undermining Islam, attacking Muslim communities, some might say, and who are seemingly trying to provide an academic fodder for the rising tide of Islamophobia we see in the West, who are the ones who are really making hay over this story.
Today's episode is no different. We are going to talk about something called the carbon dating data as it relates to the early Quranic manuscripts. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jay Smith, and welcome again, brother. Could you give our audience just a brief explanation of what we mean by that?
Yeah, we're moving now into the fifth real problem that we're bringing up in this series on the Quran itself. And this is the one that came about because of what happened back in 2015 when you had the Birmingham folios were carbon dated in the Oxford lab in Britain. And the date they did was 568 to 645, which problematic in and of itself, but immediately it was all over the news. This is the oldest Quran. It's only 2 folios from Surah 18, 19, and 20. But fascinating when they look at those dates, though it was all over the news. BBC headlined it. Dr. Thomas, who is the curator for these manuscripts in Birmingham, went on BBC Live and said, yes, this looks like a Quran that even Muhammad could have been reading or had made at this time because it follows his life. He was born in 570, died in 632. This goes from 568 to 645. Many Muslim scholars didn't say too much, and you can see why. And the reason is this 568 is 2 years before Muhammad was even born.
That's right.
And 645 is 7 years before the Quran was canonized, was finally written down in its final recension that we talked about in an earlier episode by Uthman.
That's right.
So you've got a problem on both sides of the dates.
Carbon dating suggests the world's oldest Quran may be older than the Prophet Muhammad, according to a misleading headline that was crafted specifically to make atheists on the internet jizz in their pants. The University of Birmingham has a really old Quran, and some researchers there took it to the University of Oxford in order to have it radiocarbon dated. And carbon dating is really fascinating and very important to archaeologists and anthropologists who want to place an item within a specific time span. You can't necessarily narrow it down to the exact year, but you can get fairly close as long as the piece was produced sometime in the past 50,000 years. So in this case, the researchers found that this particular Quran dated from somewhere between 568 and 645 AD. And Muhammad supposedly got his revelation sometime between 570 AD and 632 AD when he died. So right there, you have a lot of overlap between these two spans of time in which the Quran could have been produced after Muhammad's death, as is generally accepted. For instance, he died in 632. This research shows that the parchment could date to around 645. Done. Even if that overlap wasn't there, if, for instance, this research showed that the Quran must have been produced sometime before 570, then it still wouldn't prove that the Quran was produced before Muhammad's death, because this dates the actual parchment, which could have been created long before it was written on. You see, parchment is animal skin, and radiocarbon dating works by measuring the amount of a specific isotope of carbon that is left in something, and then working backward to find out when that organism stopped collecting carbon. For a plant, they collect carbon from the atmosphere. Animals get it from plants and from other animals that eat plants. So in other words, radiocarbon dating tells us when an animal died, because over the years, that isotope will decay at a very understood and stable rate. So for this research, we know that the animal in question died between 568 and 645, but we don't know when that animal was skinned or when that skin underwent the long process of being turned into parchment, or when that parchment was then written on. Testing the ink would get us a little bit closer to figuring out when the parchment was written on, but that's not totally reliable either, because there's not a lot of carbon in little bits of ink, and there tends to be a lot of commingling with the carbon on the parchment. It's really fascinating how researchers like this use techniques like radiocarbon dating and others to pinpoint dates. That's the story here. That, and maybe the fact that this is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, Qurans in the world, which helps us get a better idea about the founding of Islam, which is really cool. That's the story. It's not worth taking this research and misinterpreting it and then forming an atheist circle jerk around it and pretending as though it suddenly debunks Islam. It doesn't, and pretending that it does just makes atheists look stupid.